action.
And we were driving along these little roads and the snow was like this on either side.
Kay broke a plate.
Oh, gosh, it...
1, 2.
Fashion one, so you can't even
Just pop
tell.
this plate down here a minute.
There was no lights to tell you that it was still on.
Crack! I've never been to a therapist, but I've seen them on the telly. Do you see what she's done to me? I was not a bracelet man. I wasn't even wearing a ring. And now, I'm going to have chains on next. No, I'm not.
Can I just pause and ask you, is that different there?
Where?
Here, all this. Is that always there?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine.
It's having some milk in the microwave. Or as Nigella Lawson says, in the microwave.
In the microwave, it's great, but if you like prettily packaged things and, you know, all of that...
Dudes aren't into that.
No.
It's always...
It's called a Rocher ink blot or something or other.
I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Oh, from the chocolate people. Welcome, everybody, to the Bakery Bears video show featuring my favourite blanket. Oh my goodness, it's so exciting.
Are you excited?
Yes. I can't believe that we're already 4 episodes into the series.
I know.
It literally feels like 2 minutes ago
It does.
that we started it.
It does.
It's bananas.
And yeah, it's episode 4.
And it's sort of like Christmas Eve. And I'll tell you why. Because in today's episode, you finish the increases.
Yes.
Your blanket will now get to its zenith.
Its width. Yes.
I mean, how cool is that? So after today's section, you'll know how wide it's going to be.
Yeah.
And that was a big moment, wasn't it, for you? You were like, yes.
Yes, when I was knitting the kind of prototype, yeah, I wanted to make sure that it was a really good width and that it, you know, it's not huge by any standards because, you know, we're knitting this as one thing. So I didn't want it to be this massive, heavy, enormous blanket on your needles. Is it needle or needles when it's a circular needle? It's just one thing, isn't it? But it has 2 tips. I never know whether to call it a needle or needles. Anyway.
So excitement abound today. And then, I mean, it's even more exciting to think about the next episode of My Favourite Blanket.
It is.
There'll be little tidbits of that all the way through the show.
There will.
Now, Kay went and cursed us on the last episode of My Favourite Blanket because she said, this is the last time you will see me in my big coat. And let me tell you, talk about winter wonderland.
I know.
I was out running this morning and I checked the temperature. I always check the temperature before I go and make sure I'm wearing the right things. -9.
-9. That's degrees C this morning. Craziness. To say it's almost not far off Easter, really, is it?
We say it's craziness, but we've seen cold, not far off Easters before.
We have.
We went away on holiday one year, and there were like massive drifts.
Yeah, we went up. It was quite high up where we went, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was the highest village.
It was near Shap, if you know that area. It was near there. So, yeah, and it was Easter, and we were driving along these little roads, and the snow was like this on either side.
Kay broke a plate.
Oh, gosh. Do you know, it had one of those cookers, which is like a sort of like an old-fashioned electric hob. I don't like electric hobs at all. I've always cooked on gas. I know.
Cooking on gas, baby.
Yeah, I know that might not be possible at all in the probably very near future, but I've always cooked on gas and I don't like electric hobs. And I just forgot that this one was I'd just turned it off.
Yeah.
And of course it was an old-fashioned one, so you can't even
just pop
tell.
this plate down here a minute.
There was no lights to tell you that it was still on.
Crack!
And I just put this plate down on top of the hob and it totally cracked.
Oh dear.
I must have left them a note or something.
No, I think we told them.
Oh, we told them because it was next door to where
we
were. Yeah, so I came clean and told them. Yeah.
So yes, get ready when you venture out to find out what today's inspiration is for the colourway.
Yes.
It's going to be a serious winter wonderland. Like, oh my goodness, gorgeous, really.
Really, really pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no complaints from us. My favourite blanket is just the start of the knitted loveliness in this episode because, as promised, the Wizardy socks are out now.
They are.
And you'll be showing
Yes.
a thick weight version.
Yeah, I did. Within the Wizardy socks pattern, there is a DK weight version, 3 sizes for DK weight, and I've got those still on the needles. I'm well into the second sock now, so I'm going to show you those a bit later.
Epic.
Yeah.
I told you it's full of knitted loveliness.
Yes.
And it most certainly is. Now, folks, I've never been to a therapist, but I've seen them on the telly. And I love the things where they get out those cards, don't they? And they show the cards and they say to people, what do you think this is? Now, every time I see this, I think it's a butterfly. Don't you?
Yeah.
You know, when you see it on the telly. It's always...
It's called a Rocher ink blot or something or other.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Oh, from the chocolate people.
No, it's not Ferrero Rocher.
Oh, okay.
I've said it wrong. I can't remember the exact name, but it's something similar to
What did you think it was, a Rocher?
Ink blot.
Right. Maybe it's a Cadbury's ink blot.
I don't think it's Cadbury's.
No.
No.
So it's used, I'm told, because it gives a therapist... Now, there might be people out there who know way more than I do, and if you do, please comment in the show notes below, because I'd love to know more. But my understanding of it is that when you show an image to someone, what they see gives you like a view into how their brain works.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
So I think it must be a positive that when I see it, I see a lovely, pretty butterfly.
Yeah, but we don't know what a butterfly means.
No, maybe it's something terrible.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Now, look, I experienced this in real time in the last 24 hours. It was rather epic. Oh, yes, because it wasn't a Rocher ink blot or whatever they're called. Oh, no. Kay, she is preparing some milk in the microwave. Or as Nigella Lawson says, in the microwave.
In the microwave.
And she spilt some milk in the microwave. And immediately... in 1 second, there was no like, oh, what does that look like? Immediately, she's like laughing her head off and going, oh my goodness, it looks like... Now, don't say what it looks like.
Okay.
Because I thought it might be quite fun to show the viewers at home.
Yeah, what do you think it looks like?
What you saw, here it is. What do you see?
What do you see?
We'll give you a few seconds to have a ponder. Do feel free to be honest and comment in the show notes below. What Kay saw was, of course... it's Santa.
I saw Santa.
Look.
Oh my gosh.
There's his beard.
Not stop laughing.
There's 2 eyes, and there's even the shape of his head.
There is where I'd put the little jug down, it had milk on the bottom.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I could not stop laughing. I was just absolutely wetting myself. And I was laughing that much that Bryony could hear me. She was in the bath upstairs. And she came out of the bath and she went, what has been going on?
What are you cackling at?
What are you cackling at?
That's what she said.
That's what
How
she
nice.
said.
What are you cackling
What are
at?
you cackling at?
I love it.
And we took a picture of it as that you've just seen.
Yeah.
Because I obviously washed it and showed it to her. Well, you kind
Obviously.
of think, well, obviously I washed it, but kind of when I saw it, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to wash it. But
It's Santa.
got to wash it. It's milk, isn't it?
And look, folks, it's not the time to talk about it now, but all I shall say is this. Christmas at the Bakery Bear's house is sorted.
Gosh, hey, you won't believe it. Dan's been like Mr.
It's not just
Inspiration.
Dan, it's both of us.
Well, it's both of us, but Dan came up with just the most brilliant ideas recently.
We set the bar high
And-
last year with
Yeah.
our Dickensian Christmas.
Yeah.
But that, ladies and gentlemen, is in the rearview mirror. We shall say nothing more.
No, we're
Other
not.
than-
No.
The wheels are turning
They're
on the
very
greatest.
much. They are very much turning, and very, very excited about the prospects of
Yes.
the whole thing. Really.
But backstepping from that, we're even more excited about the upcoming summer of stitching.
We are.
I mean, like, oh
And
my goodness.
I'm going to be talking about that with my first project, actually.
Excellent.
So we'll
I shall say
save
nothing more.
that. Yes.
Oh, I must just say, before we move into the main sections of the show,
Yes.
I did sort of touch on, didn't I, that I'd broken one of my bracelets.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And the new one arrived.
Yes.
And here it is. It's this one here. This one,
It's
it has a clasp.
Yeah, it's a double bracelet. So it's this here.
Yes.
And there's a leather, and then there's... What's this, Mother of Pearl, Dan?
Yes, it is.
Tiger's Eye.
And the one that broke was Tiger's Eye, and that's why I really wanted one with Tiger's Eye on. But what I love about it is it links the leather with the beads.
Yes.
And I'm thinking actually for Father's Day.
Oh, no, you don't need another one.
Yeah, I do, because I'm worried that these are going to go.
Oh, you need a backup.
For Father's Day, I would love so much another bracelet
Yes.
so that when these inevitably break,
So a beaded bracelet.
I don't feel like the world is ending until I get the new ones. Do you see what she's done to me? I was not a bracelet man. I wasn't even wearing a ring. And now, I'm going to have chains on next. No, I'm not. So, yes, purchased from Trend Him. Great name.
Trend Him.
Yes.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine and lovely, and it arrived quickly.
Yeah.
It came with either DPD or somebody like that. But the packaging wasn't brilliant. It was literally in a padded bag it was just inside the padded bag, and that was it.
Right.
So, but it was perfectly fine. The product itself is great.
The clasp looks really secure, so
yes,
I'm happy.
So far, it's great. But if you like prettily packaged things and all of that,
dudes aren't into that.
No, it wasn't that, but it's perfectly.
I bet you a dude packaged that up. Right,
Probably.
Another purchase.
No, in the bag,
go.
In the post. That's it.
That's what I would have done. Look. Forget all of this, because we have way too many wonderful things to look at.
We do.
So it's time, without further ado, that I ask Kay Jones, what's on your needles?
So, my first thing, now I'll pre-warn you that, as I said last time, this occasion of me showing you projects is very socky.
Oh.
Very, very socky.
That's fine, because there was none last time.
There was none last time.
Weird.
No socks at all.
That was just weird.
It was weird.
Yes.
So this time I'm all about the socks. So the first pair that I've got is in my lovely new seaside bag that I showed you last time from lovely Emma at Moo and Mouse. Ooh, love it so much. So in my seaside bag is a seaside themed pair of socks. This is very exciting. So... This is
very exciting.
I know, I've just said that.
I know, I was reaffirming it even more.
And you were looking at it and then you were like, oh, yes.
I know what this is.
So this pair of socks is for our Summer of Stitching
Just a little bit of it.
Part of it,
yes.
Yeah. So this design will be going out beginning probably towards the end of May, I think is when we normally start it.
That's right, Summer of Stitching runs, it's for...
May, June, July or
yes,
something.
Yes, it's May, June and July. That's exactly when it is.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So these socks will be the first item, and then there will be something else as well.
But this is a course.
Yes, this is a course. So it's a sock knitting course, like we did last year for the Summer of Stitching.
Last year was really quite challenging. It was the
Moonstruck.
Was it?
Moonstruck socks.
Is that what they were called? That's cool.
Yeah, were they called?
Yeah, I think they were, because I'm thinking
Moonstruck.
Cher. So
I was thinking Cher as well.
yes.
Yeah, Moonstruck socks last time. And they were quite a challenging knit in terms of the lace was quite involved.
Yeah.
And the pattern ran down either side of the legs. So that in itself requires, each sock to be different. So this time... I've gone for a design that's beachy themed, because the whole theme for the Summer of Stitching this year, I'm sure I said last time actually, is the English seaside. So that's the theme that will be running through the whole of the event.
All the events and all the courses.
Yes. And
just so everyone's aware, they're available in full to our silver, gold and platinum Bakery Bear patrons.
Yes. When I came to design a pair of socks, I kind of had an idea in my head, and I'm just thrilled. The yarn and the pattern and everything is just so pretty. So my idea for these socks is that they would depict that sort of lovely balmy summer day when you were young and you went down to the beach. So yeah, it's one of those days when you're young and carefree, and the sun's shining, not too hot, sun's shining, you're down on the beach and you're doing a bit of beach combing and you're looking for shells, and you've got your little bucket and you're finding your shells and you're popping them in there. Oh, lovely. So it's that sort of feeling. So I thought, right, I want to design a pair of socks that has a lace panel that runs down just the front of the leg. So the back of the leg is plain. So, all the action is on the front. And it depicts those shells that you're picking up. So these are the Beachcomber socks. because that just seemed perfect to me. And I'm on the foot of the first sock. I'll show you the yarn first, actually. I actually had a skein of this yarn. It's up here. And the colour's slightly different, actually, but that's fine. I've had this for a while. But the base wasn't quite right. The base that I got is Eden Cottage yarns, and the base that I had in my stash is called Hayton. And it's an 80-10-10, so it's a cashmere merino nylon. And the colourway is sand. I thought, perfect. But the yardage on it is only 350 metres, so it's really quite plump. I thought, I don't know, it's just a bit too plump really for... It's not sport, but it's just a bit plumper than normal fingering. Anyway, so I went back to Victoria's shop to see whether she got the same colour on a different base, and she did. And the one that I picked up, same colourway, sand, is on the Brimham, which is one of my favourite bases. It's actually the same base that I'm using to dye my favourite blanket on. It's an 85-15, and you get 400 metres with this. So it's this gorgeous golden shade. It's really, really pretty. And just perfect for a beachy pair of socks. So here are the socks. Like I say, I'm on the foot, and it's just this, beautiful lace panel down the front, and the centre lace here, the spirally sort of looking lace, that's depicting those shells. I can't remember the name of them, I did look them up, but do you know the spirally shells that you find on the beach? And then the panels down the side are those kind of little teeny tiny shells that you always find. And again, I did look up names of shells, and I made a note in my design book so I could say when we actually run the course. But isn't it just gorgeous? And then the back of the leg, like I said, is just plain. But what I did, which took me actually the longest amount of time with this design, I've spoke about this before, but when I design socks, I like the rib to be part of the design. So I always like the rib to flow into the design. Now sometimes you can just do a standard knit 2 purl 2 or knit 1 purl 1 and it does flow in perfectly. This did not, because it's a very specific sort of sequence of stitches across the top. So I spent absolutely ages, and I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think that I could actually design a rib that would flow in, just because it's such a specific, like I say, sequence of stitches. But I did it. And it's different for each size. So there's 3 sizes, and the rib is different for each size. So it's a very long process in terms of, I have to chart out each size and then write out each size, and each size is separate in the pattern. So it is a lot more work, but the difference is, I hope you can see how that flows into the design. And for me, it's just worth all of the effort.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the ribs can look, certainly 2x2. I mean, it depends on the pattern, but sometimes I think 2x2, it just looks a bit butch. For me, it looks a bit forced. It doesn't look very delicate. And
no, I mean, I like a 2x2 rib. I've not got a problem with it, and I like 1x1, and I like twisted ribs.
Well, as I've said, long-term viewers who remember my past projects will know that I get particularly excited. Is it I can't remember if it is the... is it on the Declan's hat, which is not available anymore?
No, do you know, I looked this up. You might remember years ago, me and Dan knit quite a few of these hats, and it's called Declan's hat, and it was always free on Ravelry. And actually I went to look at it recently because I was thinking of knitting another one, and it's no longer available on Ravelry. The pattern's been withdrawn. Now, we think we might have a printed copy of it somewhere. Dan thinks he might have a printed copy somewhere. Yeah. I didn't store it in my library on Ravelry, unfortunately. But we're hoping we do have a printed copy somewhere, because it's a brilliant hat, and I think I knit it 3 times, you've knit it a couple of times.
I can't recall if it's I think it might be that hat, or it could be the speargrass. But I remember the first time I ever did a rib, which was a specific rib which flowed into a pattern. And for me, it was like then everything made sense.
Yeah.
It was like it was linked. And for me, the best patterns feel coherent. They feel like they flow through.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why everything's put in. It's not, oh, well, I'll just do 2x2 ribbing because... that's what
and
you do
know, very often I see sock patterns that do just have a basic rib, and it's sort of when you then look at the design that follows it, I find it sometimes a bit jarring.
That's exactly.
But that's just me.
No, I'm not. It's not just you. I'm with you.
I'm not criticising designers at all in that. It's just my own preference. That's all it is. So I would rather spend the time creating something that flows. And this definitely does that. The knits and pearls flow into the design, which is brilliant. So I was so thrilled when I figured it out, and for all 3 sizes, because each size is different, because the stitch count's obviously different. And it's just so lovely to knit. The stitch pattern's really, really addictive. It's quite an intense lace pattern, because part of it, I won't go into too many details because this will all be in the course, but... parts of it are quite intense and other parts are sort of more straightforward. It's
definitely not as intense. I don't know. It doesn't look as intense to me as the Moonstruck.
No, it's not. No. I would say it is a much more accessible, maybe is the right word, than the Moonstruck. I mean,
Moonstruck was an intermediate to advanced course, do you think?
Yeah, probably. This I would go intermediate with this one.
Intermediate towards an advanced beginner. Or isn't it?
Have you just made that up, that saying?
You can make as many as you want. Or is it just an out-and-out intermediate?
Well, to be honest, I always think sock knitting is generally an intermediate knitter.
Right. Because of the turning of the heel, that's quite...
Because of everything involved with knitting a pair of socks.
Yeah.
So we've got some lace going on this one, but it's really, really lovely to knit. And like I said, I'll go into all the details when we do the course, but I'm just loving it. So my plan is to finish this one sock. I have written the pattern already.
So the way it works with the Summer of Stitching sock pattern is Kay produces a whole pattern which accompanies the series, which will only ever be available to our silver, gold and platinum patrons.
Yes.
So the pattern will never be released for purchase.
No.
It's available free as part of the course.
Yeah.
Just like the Moonstruck, which is available right now for silver, gold and platinum patrons.
Yeah,
and it all kicks off in May.
Yes, in May.
May, June and July is the Summer of Stitching.
Yeah, so really exciting. So I'm going to get on and get that finished. We're going to film it and it'll all be fabulous and exciting and... Oh, can't wait. And I love the theme. The seaside theme is so fun because there's so much scope for design, I think, with a seaside theme. I'm just having so much fun. It's brilliant. So, Dan Jones, what's on your lovely needles?
It's a mitten. No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. A mitten.
I'm sorry. I do get confused.
I know you do. It's not your fault, darling.
You
do try.
Whether it's mitts and mittens or tank tops and... What else can you call it? I'm showing one later.
I don't know. A vest,
it's a tank top.
A slip over.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
So look, it's all too confusing. So this is a mitten. I did get it right. It's the Equinox Mittens.
Mittens.
I said that like Bettany Hughes.
Yeah.
Like Bettany Hughes presents. Yes, we love to watch Bettany Hughes present her historical programmes, apart from when she's talking about Greece and it all gets a bit too much.
She's very into the sort of mythology and all of that business, and I'm just not...
Bettany Hughes is a historian. She used to be on Time Team, the later series of Time Team.
Yes.
She's a historian. She's produced lots of series for Channel 5 and Channel 4 in the UK.
Yeah.
And they're all... good.
They're all good.
Good.
And they're all interesting. But she's got a very particular way of presenting and speaking.
Her delivery can be a little bit...
Her delivery is just
spaced
odd.
out.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd.
Like I just spoke that last line.
Yeah, she says she does. You'd have to watch her to understand what we're saying, but we really...
She sometimes intonates things rather interestingly.
She does. Yeah, she's...
But I neglected to put strange gaps in that sentence.
Yeah, she'll talk as if she's like building up to some amazing piece of final bit of information, and then it'll just be a normal sentence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we'll be like, oh,
Yes.
right, okay.
Also, as well, she's the only historian I've ever heard talking about things who, when she's like walking around a site that she's visiting for the first time, says, we've done lots of work on this site.
Yeah.
No, it's not we.
The
Men and women who've probably been working there for decades did the work.
Yeah, I think she sort of groups herself with all of
It's because she's a historian.
She's a historian. When she says we, she means all the historians and Egyptologists and archaeologists, and that's what she means. But it can sometimes come across as a
Strange delivery.
Yeah, it's just. But
she's our new Jane McDonald.
We've watched. I think pretty much everything that she's done. We really enjoy them. You've just got to sort of get used to that way of her style.
Yes, and just maybe avoid the Greek ones. Yeah,
I'm not into them.
As much as I love Greek, I love Greek history. It's the business. So, I'm certainly not criticising Greek history. It's just when she talks about Greece, it's weird.
It's the mythology.
It's weird.
It's all the sort of like made up stuff.
Forget the hues.
Yeah.
And more Equinox mitts. That's hard to say.
Mittens.
Oh, you see, it's
just
all gone
call them
wrong.
whatever you want.
No, Equinox mittens. Love it. It's so much fun. I do love a lovely mitten.
Yes.
And the yarn, it's gorgeous.
It's lovely.
It's the merino yak, isn't it?
It's the merino yak again. It's the Regia merino yak. I just love this colourway, actually.
Sort of addicted.
It is.
Proper Latvian braid at the bottom.
Yes.
Nice thumb gusset, baby. Oh, yes. But look, I have a problem with the backwards loop cast on.
You do have a problem with it.
And I have to practice it. Because the question is, you would never cast on a whole project using the backwards loop cast on, would you?
No.
It's only ever an additional one.
Well, I wouldn't.
No, that would be crazy.
I wouldn't have thought that would be a thing.
No. And so you don't get the opportunity to do it very much, do you?
No, but I don't see that as a problem because I don't think it's...
But how do you ever learn to sort of do it great without practice? I need to practice it.
Right. You see, I don't get this with Dan. It's a bit
I
odd
do.
for me.
Well,
but,
it's called learning. Some people are good at some things and some people aren't good at some things. And I'm not good at backwards loop cast-ons. So what I need to do is I need to get some yarn and I need to get a needle and I need to just practice it. I could do that, couldn't I?
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a ladder going on, which isn't very good.
There is a bit of a ladder there, yeah, on that side. That's not like you, actually, with DPNs. You don't normally have a ladder.
I certainly don't ever on socks.
No.
It's weird, isn't it, that's
weird.
happened on...
That is weird. But aren't they lovely? This is a pattern that I designed for Dan's birthday last year and gave it to him. And it might be a pattern that I put out at some point when Dan's finished the pair, and maybe I'll knit up a pair as well. I quite fancy doing one in white.
Look at this.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Anyone who knitted Scrooge's stocking
yes, you'll
will
recognise
that. It's very lovely.
I loved it so much, the top of Scrooge's stocking, that I thought, straight away when I did it, I thought that would be brilliant as the cuff on a mitten. So that's what I did. But the Regia Merino yak that Dan's using in this colour is 07518. It's a beautiful blue.
I think the point is with mittens, and the whole reason why I was so keen to knit these, is there's definitely a different skill set. It's similar to socks, but not. Definitely a different skill set. You're doing lots of different things, and that's the reason. I just need to remember the whole reason why I wanted to start getting into these was to try and even out the technique issues, which this is clearly one of them. And it does seem to have gone.
I can show you how to stop that ladder.
That's cool, but look, it's gone.
Oh, it has. That's after the thumb. Oh, no, I mean... Yeah, I mean, it isn't there now.
No, it went when I saw it was there and I thought, I've got to get rid of this. Right. So I was tightening up the second stitch.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's what I was just going to tell you. So that's how you avoid a ladder.
Yeah.
When you're
isn't that great? I did not realise that happened until looking at it then.
No, you're quite right. It has gone. If I hold it, can you see up here? It's not there any longer. So yeah, that's exactly what you do. You tighten up when you're working the second stitch on your needle, not the first. That will cause the ladder. Your second.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well done.
Gorgeous Equinox mitts. Wonderful yarn.
Yes.
And DPNs are just my favourite. They're wooshy.
Oh, they're wooshy.
What else is on your needles?
Right, in another lovely bag. This is the bag that I made for last year's Summer of Stitching. I didn't make the bag as part of the course. We did the embroidery on last year's Summer of Stitching. And then I made it into a little Christmas bag.
We won't be doing embroidery on this year's Summer of
We're
Stitching.
not doing embroidery. I'll say that. That's all I'm saying. But in this lovely bag, I've got the funniest pair of socks that I've started for Dan. And I'm still on my use your stash mission this year. The only yarns that I've bought this year are yarns that I've used straight away and that I've needed for a specific project.
I love that.
Do you know what I mean?
I do. That's such a brilliant justification.
So, like, something that I've finished that I'm going to show you later, I bought the yarn and I knit it
I'm
immediately.
not eating chocolate this year. The only chocolate I have bought, I've eaten straight away.
Yeah, would that work? I don't have a chocolate stash.
No stash.
No stash.
But I just bought stuff and eaten it immediately.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah, and the wool that I showed you last time in the gigantic ball, I have started a project now with that, and I'm going to show you that next time. So I haven't actually bought any yarn that I've just thought that's just beautiful. I need to have that yarn.
I do get what
stuck
you
it
mean.
in my stash.
Yeah.
And I'm using stash yarn, which just feels brilliant. And I'm actually planning on casting something on for myself on Mother's Day, which is coming up this Sunday. And I'm going to use stash yarn for that. So, very exciting. But I wanted to knit down a pair of shorty socks. We are coming sort of into the time when when you'll start wearing shorty socks.
You would have thought.
You would have thought. But it will be, it'll happen, won't it? And then we'll be moaning because it's too hot. So yeah, I thought I'm going to knit him a pair of shorty socks. So I had a look at what I got in my stash and I wanted to use the sort of standard 75-25 base because it's quite a fine yarn, I think, that base. And it always produces a pair of socks that are quite lightweight and really good for you for the summer. So I went into my stash and I found this one and I thought, So first of all, I asked Bryony and I said, do you think you'd want socks in this? And she's like, I'm not really into bright rainbows, so no. So I thought, right, okay, brilliant. I said, I'm going to use it for Dad then. He doesn't care what socks he wears, do you?
No, so long as they're hand knitted.
Well, obviously
I
they
know,
are.
but I didn't want people thinking I would just go into a shop, buy some socks and stick them on. I would never do that.
No, you only wear
Yes.
non-knitted socks for running, don't you?
Yes.
So I got this one out of my stash and I bought this year before last. This is from, I can never say, Creolian, is it?
Okay.
Creolian? Oh, I don't know, I'm really sorry, I will have said it wrong. Creolian or Creolian design. And this one that I bought was a club. It was a rainbow club, self-striping rainbow club, and it was September 2021. Look at that. That's good stash yarn, isn't it? And it's just fabulous, is all I can say. Oh, my ball winder went a bit like...
Ooh.
Don't know quite what happened there. Took it in, no one will know.
Ew.
Yeah. So it's just the most fantastic stripy yarn. And look how it's knitting up. Oh, look at that. How fun is that? So it's like a sort of mergy, blendy sort of look to it. It's just so fun to knit. So I'll show you how long the leg is. It's not very long. I do, for Dan, when I'm doing shorty socks, I do 15 rounds for the cuff, and then I do 30 rounds for the leg. Heel flap and gusset and turn and, decreases. And then down to the toe, and I'll probably do the toe in the contrast yarn as well, I think. And the contrast yarn, I dyed up myself. I was knitting these socks one morning and I was nearly down to the heel. And I thought, what colour shall I do for the heel? And, have I got a colour that I could pull out of my stash? And at the time, the nail polish I had on was like a dark greyish blue. It's an Essie Expressi, which is I don't know if it's new from Essie, but it dries really quick and they're in like thin little bottles. And they're really good. Me and Bryony really like them. And the colour of my nails next to the yarn, I was like, oh, that looks really nice. And then I thought, oh, I know what colour that is. I know what dye colour that is. And it's jacquard gunmetal. So I dyed up a mini. I was doing some dyeing actually that day, luckily. So I dyed up a mini, and it is, you know, when I put my nails next to it, it's almost exactly the same. So this was the colour that I dyed up. So this is just pure gunmetal from jacquard, and it just matches brilliantly. It sort of picks up, there is within this blue section here, there is a colour that's almost the same. If you look at it, it really sort of ties in. It's not quite the same, but it's near enough. And I just think it looks really nice with the brightness of the yarn. So I think I'll use that for the toe as well, seeing as I dyed it up. And I had, luckily, I don't generally buy this base, the 75-25, very often these days, because I'm mainly dyeing for the blanket, which is the 85-15. But I did have a couple of minis in my stash, so that was great. So it's the exact same base, and it just works perfectly. So I am well down the foot. The way that I do Dan's socks is I always keep a note in, this is a little Hobonichi notebook. And this has got all of the socks in that I've been knitting for Dan since, it's a year, just a year and a couple of months old. So every time I knit him a pair of socks, I write down all the details. And there are some shorty socks in here, so I'm just following the instructions that I've knitted before for him. And I keep track of my rows just using a locking stitch marker. You probably can't see it because it's yellow and it's on a yellow section. That's not very helpful, is it? But there's a light bulb stitch marker here, and I move it every 10 rounds. So I've just hit 100 rounds from the top to where I am now, and I've got 25 to go, and then it'll be the toe. And I'm back to doing my 10 rounds a day on my projects. It went a bit skew whiff when I was unwell, but I'm back on it now. And I actually, this morning, I knit 20 rounds on this because I was enjoying it so much in my early morning knitting. I thought, oh, I'll just get a bit more done. So this sock should be finished in 3 days, and then I will start the second one. But I'm using 2.5mm needles because I just find they work really well for Dan's socks. They produce just a nice gauge, and 72 stitches for Dan's sock. Just so fun and lovely. So if you've got some of this in your stash, hiding away in your stash, pull it out and knit yourself some summery rainbow socks.
It's not as lovely as this. Kay was looking at my work yesterday.
I was eyeing it up.
With great admiration.
I was like sneaking little looks like this, going, oh, that's lovely.
She doesn't need to, though, because I'm knitting it for her anyway. But with every stitch, I realise that I could most definitely knit myself a fingering weight jumper.
Could you?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, definitely.
That's brilliant.
It's the Roosty tank top, and it's the business.
It is.
It's so much fun. Now, I mean, I sway backwards and forwards, to be honest, because there's times where I feel like my technique is dipping a little bit, and I don't know whether I'm just not alternating quite as much as I should.
Very overly critical.
So I have increased the alternations. Yeah, I've produced a little video.
That sounds very technical.
I don't claim it's a tutorial, but I showed everyone, because lots of Baker Bear patrons were asking me how I approach colour work, so I showed them. Well, it's a technique that I developed over a certain amount of time, basically trying to get the flattest possible fabric that I can, because I can't stand it when there is any yarn dominance. And I feel pretty good about that, to be honest.
It's amazing.
You might get the odd stitch popping, but it certainly is. At the moment, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So
it's beautiful.
The yarns are perfect. It's Jameson and Smith fingering weight.
It's the jumper weight.
Right.
It's called.
Right. So is that slightly?
No, it is a fingering weight. It's just the name of the.
Because you wouldn't knit socks with it.
It's called 2-ply jumper weight. It's pure Shetland wool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's absolutely gorgeous yarn.
It's really not prickly at all.
No.
Surprising, to be honest. I thought it would be more like a thinner version of Let Low Pea.
Yeah, it's not at all.
And it isn't.
No.
The other great thing about it is whilst
Gorgeous.
It is eminently spit spliceable. It is much more robust a yarn and strong than the Let Low Pea is.
Amazing. I'm going to look wearing this.
That's no criticism of the Let Low Pea, by the way, but
No.
I find that if you were perhaps a less experienced colourwork knitter, this would be a more appropriate yarn for you to use, because the Let Low Pea, you need to be able to adjust your technique to deal with the fact that it can very easily break.
Yeah, that's
Whereas
true.
this really doesn't, which is just great.
Yeah, and you come into a section now that's got more of that pink in it. Can you see that like gorgeous pale pink?
Yes. So more
This
pink.
section's got more pink.
Also, as well, what's going to happen is, you see here how there is a line of the colours from down here.
Yeah.
We're about to get another line coming in up here.
Right.
And that's really cool. I really like that. You know, the design is clever, because, you know, someone else, just hold it up again, someone else might not have put that in there. But I just find that a bit like taking a rib and making it flow into a pattern like we were speaking about earlier, by just involving some of those colours up in that midsection.
Yeah, those little
makes everything
red
flow.
specks you mean
Yeah.
that run through, yeah.
I also think these look like some sort of cake that you could eat.
Well, the colours do look quite cakey,
Yes.
don't they?
Yeah, that's what
It's like Neapolitan ice cream or something as well, it reminds me a bit of.
my gran used to call cakes cakeys.
Cakeys.
And my gran was epic, because she had really, really bad diabetes. And the doctor obviously used to say, you can't eat things like that. And then the doctor would go and she would say, go get me a cakey. And I would say, Gran, I really shouldn't do that. And she said, I'd rather die happy. But she lived till
She was a good age.
88.
Just show, well, you know, we're absolutely not condoning that behaviour.
No, we're not. Absolutely not.
But-
I certainly won't be doing that if I end up, you know,
No.
in a similar boat to her.
But at the end of the day, you're in charge of your own destination, aren't you? Your own destiny. And
Yeah, and
it's her-
happiness and contentment takes you a long way.
It's her decision to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not condoning it, obviously.
But I mean, it did used to make me laugh.
It is quite, yeah, you know, I can't imagine. Was she your mum's mum?
No.
Oh, right, okay.
My mum's mum was a lunatic.
Well, that's why I asked that question, because that would have made sense if it was your mum's mum.
My mum's mum used to make fried bread and then pour the oil that was left in the pan over the fried bread for something for you to dip your bread in. Which is the reason why I never ate my gran's fried bread. I had it once, was nearly ill.
We did used to have fried bread growing up, you know, when you had like a fry-up for your breakfast. Wasn't very often, but we did used to have fried bread. It was delicious, I've got to say. I loved it.
It's not
but
for me.
not dripping in oil like that.
Yeah, that's what she
Fried
used to
in
do.
like the bacon, you know, all of the sort of leftover sort of fat that came
No,
out.
crisp and dry.
This is probably sounding disgusting. It wasn't crisp and dry.
That's what she used.
I don't think my mum ever used crisp and dry.
I remember the advert for that. When you fry
Yeah.
with crisp and dry.
And now
It's still
you don't-
frying.
Now you don't even need to sort of fry with a lot of oil, do you? Because they have those fryers which you only put like a tablespoon of oil
It's
in
clever.
or something.
That's
like
good stuff.
Dry fryer or something. Never tried it.
So, Roosty tank top.
Yes.
Jameson Smith jumper weight yarn.
Gorgeous.
Loving every single stitch. It's marvellous.
And I chose all of these colours.
Yeah, because I'm rubbish at things like that, so we might as
Yeah.
well lean into.
And I love them. They're very me, aren't they? Don't you think? They'll look good
Definitely.
with me.
Absolutely.
Look good with me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carla.
What else is on your needles?
Right, so the last thing
Oh, it's
is
the
another
Wizardy
pair of
socks.
socks.
TK,
I did tell you. I have been knitting other things recently, but I did tell you it would be socky. I'm just going to lean. So yeah, this is my final pair of socks that I'm going to show you. It's in another Emma bag, another Moo and Mouse bag, which is sort of autumnal themed, which is beautiful. Love it, love it. And this is my DK pair of socks in the Wizardy pattern.
Woohoo!
So this is the pattern that has just been released, and I'm working up a DK weight pair. I finished one for the pattern, and now I'm just finishing off the other one. So the first sock has been blocked so that I could take a nice picture for the pattern.
What a gorgeous colourway.
Yeah, I mean the yarn is just
What is that colourway?
lovely. This yarn is not a sock yarn, and I did, in the pattern, I did include details of the yarn that I used, but I also said within the pattern that it doesn't contain nylon, so as the knitter you might prefer to choose a different yarn. But I just loved it so much, and it just felt sort of wizardy. And it's the King Cole Merino Blend DK, Anti-Tickle, and Uncle... What could it be? Anti-Tickle and Uncle... I don't know. But isn't there a Mr. Tickle?
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't make me think of Mr. Mem. And the shade is 3801 Tyree, which will be named, I'm presuming, after the Scottish island. So it's 100... No, it's not 100%. It's 96% pure new wool and 4% viscose, which will just be the little coloured neppies. It comes in 50 gram balls and you get 113 yards per 50 grams. So I use one 50 gram ball for the first sock. And isn't the yarn just, it's so fun, those little coloured neps that you get, there's tweedy little neps, it's just so fun. And it just felt a bit magical to me. And this pattern just makes the most squishy pair of DK socks. I can't wait to have these. I'm going to keep these. I very rarely keep socks that I make. They usually all go to Bryony. Or the ones that I do keep for me are in my sock stash. We're running sock stash this year for our patrons. So the ones that I have knit for me are in my sock stash because they're too precious to wear at the moment. But these ones will be worn. These will be pyjama socks that I'll wear in the evening, and they're just perfect. So I've got the second sock on the go here, and I'm going to finish the leg today. It's in my planner to finish the leg and to do the heel flap and the turn as well today, which is perfectly doable because DK socks are just so quick. And I'm knitting these on 3.25mm, and that's what I recommend in the pattern as well. But it depends, you know, if you are a very tight knitter, with DK you might want to go up to like 3.5mm. But you will know if you're a tight knitter and if you need to go up a needle size. But for me, 3.25 works really well. Just produces a great fitting sock. And I'm using my favourite, I've got to say, are these my favourite? I think these are my favourite interchangeable needles, and it's Higher Bamboo. I absolutely love these needles. It's the needles I'm using to knit my favourite blanket. But yeah, I just love these needles, and they're actually brilliant for sock knitting. I'm not having any problems at all with the cable. And you know, historically with Higher's, the cable for knitting socks, I don't like their, you know, like a 2.25mm. I'm not keen on them. But these ones have just been brilliant. I've had no problems at all with them, and it, you know, it's knitting brilliantly. And I just love the bamboo needles. For me, they've got, you know, they're not super grippy. They do have a bit of slide about them. I think the more you work with them, the smoother they get. I just love them, and they're an absolute joy to knit. So yeah, second sock on the go, and this one will be finished fairly quick, I would say. Love them. So Wizardy Socks pattern is out. Go grab yourself a copy if you would like to knit up some magical socks. I'm going to use this pattern for my Sockoween socks this year. Sockoween. I kind of want to start them already because I think I've got the yarn. I think I know I'm going to use, but obviously I'm not going to start them yet. But yes, very exciting.
Can I just ask your advice, please?
Yes.
It is about my Roosty tank top.
Yes.
It's obviously colour work, so it's producing an awful lot of ends.
Yes.
Would there be an issue with me weaving the ends in now?
No.
Excellent. I wasn't sure.
You can weave in as you go along.
It's funny, isn't it?
Don't snip the ends though. Don't snip them short.
Okay.
Weave them in and then just leave the
a
ends.
dangly bit?
Yes.
Okay.
Because when it's soaked, when it's washed, when you wash and block it, there's movement in the yarns, and sometimes the tail ends can sort of pop through if they're too short.
So leave them.
So trim them after it's been washed and blocked. But yes, you can weave in now.
Right.
As you go along.
It is producing an awful lot of ends.
Yeah. So weaving in as you go along is much less arduous.
I mean, it looks like hair. I need to do something about it, because I just think that, because all the ends are going to end up in the same place, and it's going to run up the whole thing.
Right.
And I'm concerned it's going to start getting tangled up and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to spend some time.
Yeah, do it. I'll help you and show you what to do.
Yeah, I mean, you have done before quite a few times.
Okay,
But, I don't know. Well, no, you see, I need to practice things like that. It's the amount of time, though. It's like... But no, that's cool. It's all part of the process.
It is.
Trust the process, as Dan Campbell would say.
Oh, yeah.
As all American football coaches tend to say.
So much goings on at the moment in the NFL.
Yes.
So much.
Free agency leading into draft.
Yes.
Exciting times.
Very,
Look,
very.
But who's ready for some more blanket action?
Oh, yay!
And this is a big day because, as we said at the top of the show, today you shall finish your increases. You will finally know the width of your blanket.
And I'll tell you the width of mine.
Perfect.
Because I have finished section 4 and I will show you that after you've seen it.
So the question is, what colourway will empower this momentous occasion? What plant has Kay chosen to inspire this wonderful finish to the first section of the blanket? Let's find out in the very latest My Favourite Blanket.
I adore creating and knitting blankets, so I decided to design a new one just for us. In this series, I'm going to show you how to make your own, from the yarn to the stitches. Join me as we knit through the seasons to create my favourite blanket. Welcome everybody to another episode of My Favourite Blanket, and welcome to an absolute winter wonderland today. We woke up this morning, middle of March, and this is what it looked like. So it's incredibly beautiful and incredibly odd. I say it's odd, but actually quite often these days we tend to get snow in March. But how beautiful for you all to see this gorgeous woodland covered in snow. I'm here to talk to you about today's inspiration, today's plant inspiration for the colourway that we're going to be dyeing up for My Favourite Blanket. Now today I have chosen a shrub actually, and it's a deciduous shrub. It's quite thorny, it's just beautiful. It's called a Japanese quince. It has the most beautiful flower, which flowers at this time of year in the spring. It's a sort of red-orange cup-shaped flower with a yellow centre, and it has very glossy green leaves which are sort of flushed red in the beginning. And then later in the season, in the autumn, or towards the autumn, it has a fruit which is called the quince fruit, and that fruit is like a sort of pale yellowy, limey sort of green. So what I've taken from that plant this time is the flower colour. So our speckled yarn is going to be reds and some golden yellow, and then the sort of tonal, slightly variegated second colour is going to be the quince fruit, and together they're just going to make the most beautiful combination. The quince fruit, because it's quite a delicate colour, what that will do is it'll allow the sort of red and the gold really to shine through when we knit them together. So before we can start knitting it into the blanket, we do of course need to get out of this gorgeous snow, it's so pretty, into the kitchen and start dyeing the yarn. Okay, so what are we going to need to dye up our beautiful Japanese quince yarn? So first of all, we're going to need the yarn. Now, as always with this whole series, I'm going to be dyeing up twice as much yarn as I actually need. So in my bowl here, which has been soaking, I've got 4 skeins that are each 50 grams, and it's fingering weight yarn, and each of the 50 grams is 200 meters, and I'm going to be dyeing 2 of each of the 2 colors today. And I'm doing this so that if you only have 100 gram skeins of yarn, if you can't get 50 grams, then the quantities will be the same. So I will be dyeing up 2 in our main I say main colour, but there isn't really a main and a contrast, but 2 in our speckled and 2 in our sort of tonal variegated. And this is soaking in just some warm water from the tap and a good scoop of citric acid. And it's actually been soaking for longer than I normally soak yarn. Usually half an hour is enough, you know, for it to just penetrate the fibres. But today we're going to be using some colours which I find can be sort of quite notorious for bleeding. So it's probably had a good hour soaking in the water and the citric acid. And when I say a scoop, this is my pot. It comes with these little scoops, which I think is about a tablespoon, and I just put in a heaped scoop. I do get asked quite often what measurement that is and what quantities to yarn should you use for citric acid. I've never been able to find a specific sort of chart, if you like, that tells you how much citric acid to use, so I'm just guided by what I've always done. And for effectively I've got 200 grams of yarn here. I find that a good old scoop like that in the water is fine. So that's our yarn that's soaking. We've got our 2 pots today that we're going to be dyeing in. These are stainless steel casserole pots. You can see they're double handled. All of your equipment that you use for dyeing should only ever be used for dyeing once you've dyed yarn in it, or used the equipment to dye yarn, because the dye powders are toxic. So make sure that you just keep everything separate that you use for your dyeing. And I've got 2 of these pots, 1 for each colour. Then we've got our big spoon, definitely going to need that today. We've got something to protect our work surfaces because I'm just dyeing in the kitchen, and I would have thought a lot of you will be as well. So I've got an old piece of oilcloth and some tea towels. I've then got my gloves. I've got a thin pair of gloves and a thicker pair. That's just what I like to use. I've got my dye book with my recipes in. So we are speckling again today, so we're going to need brushes, but we're also going to need our 1/8 of a measure, 1/8 of a teaspoon measure. And then also today, you're going to need a little jug of some sort. I have just got this plastic one, which was cheap as chips, and I just keep this purely for my dyeing. So you're going to need some sort of little jug, which has got some measures on. And then finally, it's the dye colours. I've sort of split these off into 2 groups because that's for each of the 2 colours. So there's 6 colours today altogether, but we're starting off with the speckled yarn, which depicts the flower colour. So what we've got for that is 2 reds. Now it's red that I find can be tricky to set. It's just one of those colours. I mean, I don't know why, but it can bleed quite easily when you rinse it if it's not fully, set properly. And I just find that especially when you're speckling it, you just have to be a bit more careful and just make sure it's absolutely set before you sort of move it around. So the 2 reds that I'm going to be using today, they're both from Jacquard. The first one is Fire Red, which is number 618. Now, Fire Red is as it sounds. It's that bright sort of fire engine red. If you know the colour of fire engines in this country, I'm not sure. Are they all red in every country? I don't even know. But certainly in this country, that fire engine red. So we've got that one. And then the other red is Scarlet, also from Jacquard. That is 609. And Scarlet is a bit more of a lighter red. The Scarlet just adds a little bit of depth. And then the other colour that we're going to be speckling today is a lovely bright yellow. Again, it's jacquard and it's sun yellow. Now this one is a very bright yellow, but we need that because we want to have those yellow speckles shine through when we're holding it double with the background yarn. So sun yellow, so that's number 601. So if you can't get this exact dye brand, you're going to need a really bright yellow. We've got that fire red, which is that true bright red, and then scarlet, which is just of a slightly sort of paler red. And then for our second colour, so our sort of tonal, variegated, we've got another 3 colours. Now this time we've got 1 jacquard and 2 landscapes. So the 2 landscape dyes are sugarcane. Now sugarcane is a sort of golden yellow, and lichen. And lichen is a sort of, you know, if you imagine that greenish yellowish lichen that you see on stones, it's that kind of a colour. And then the final one we've got is another jacquard, and this is chartreuse, which is 628. Now chartreuse is, as it says, it's like a really bright, almost neon green, and it's that sort of light bright. I mean, if you know chartreuse, it is exactly that colour. Now, if you can't get the landscape dyes, because I know they can be tricky to get hold of in certain countries, then this tonal colour that we're creating is like a yellowish, pale, limey green. So you're going to need some form of like a golden yellow and then a really bright light green. And we're going to combine those. Okay, so that's everything that we're going to need today. So we've got our yarn already soaked, so we can get straight over to the stove and start dyeing our speckled yarn. Okay, so in my pot here I've got just about an inch of water. You don't need very much water at all when we're speckling, so just about an inch, and there's another scoop of citric acid in there. That's heating up nicely, it's steaming at the moment, and I'm just getting bubbles forming on the bottom. So it's time to put our yarn in. So for me, I've got 2 skeins, which is 2 50-gram skeins of fingering weight. Squidge it all out. And the reason we squidge out as much water as we can is because we're speckling, I don't want to introduce too much extra water into there. So just release the fibres a little bit, and then we're going to drop both skeins in. So as they go in, what I'm trying to do is keep one of the skeins over here and one over here, so that when I'm speckling, I know that I'm going to get sort of as much as I can equally speckled on each skein. It's never exact. Inevitably, I always find that if I've got 2 skeins in my pot, one will always be a bit more speckled than the other. And I think that might be something to do with if you're left-handed or right-handed. I think you just naturally maybe go a bit heavier on the side that you would normally use with a pen. So that's all nicely distributed. It started to bubble already, which is good. I'm just going to let that heat up fully. And what we want when we're speckling is, you can see that the yarn is sitting just above the surface of the water. So we have got a few little sort of puddles, but largely it's sat above the water. So that is now bubbling. I'm going to turn my heat down just so that it maintains a nice temperature. We don't want this boiling, particularly when we're speckling. You absolutely don't want it rolling boiling, because that action of the boiling will disturb the speckles. You just want it nice and hot at this stage. So that's steaming, and we're ready to start speckling. Okay, so we are going to start with the fire red. Now, I'm always not scared of using red dye, but it just somehow has this ability to get everywhere. So I'm always super careful when I'm using red dye. So fire red is our first colour. So get your paintbrush, and we're following the same method that we have before for the speckling. I'm going to do it exactly the same because I'm maintaining that sort of speckly look all the way through the blanket. So we're using different colours, but we're using the same speckling technique. So I'm going to bring my pot over, dab your paintbrush in. You don't want a whole lot on it, but you want to be able to see the dye powder on there, which is tricky when it's red. But there we go. Now, just find an area. That just dropped, so we're going to do it there. And just speckle a little bit of the red on. Okay, and then move. Find another area. A bit more. Over to the other side. A bit more. Over here. So we're just grouping it together, if you like, and just having little areas. This water's boiling too much. I'm going to turn it off. Can you see what happened there? What happened was a bubble came up as I was speckling, and it went like that with the dye. It's fine, don't worry about it if that happens. You know, we've just got a little puddle of dye rather than a sort of speckle. But it's okay, don't worry if that happens. So I've turned my heat off for the moment while I'm speckling. So I'll just get a little bit more on my brush. I'm going to go here. So go easy with the red. We want to have some white space around the red because inevitably you will get some bleeding, so you will get sort of a gentle pink hue to the yarn overall on the background, but then we will get some intense red speckles too. So I'm just making sure that I've got enough, because you know we really want to emphasize that beautiful red flower. That all looks good. Lid straight on, and then straight to the next red, which is the scarlet. Now this might look exactly the same when you put it on. What it does is it gives us some depth. So again, grab it. And what I'm going to do with this colour is some of it is going to go on top, and then some of it is just going to go sort of around the edges of the area that we've already speckled. So some on top, some around the edges. Putting it on top like that, that's what will give us some depth to the reds. And then putting a little by itself will give us another sort of aspect of red, if you like. So just, it can be difficult to remember where you've been. I kind of tend to go around methodically in like a clock face, if you like, just to make sure that I don't miss an area. I think that's good. Right, so now we're going to add in some little highlights of yellow. So this is a very bright yellow, but what we're going to do is we're going to get these areas that we've not speckled red. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here, 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 and just put little highlights of yellow. This is just representing the centre of the flower, so it doesn't need to be, you know, we don't need a huge amount. We just want to see those little bright specks of yellow like you will see in the centre of the flower. So just find those areas where we haven't put the red and give it a little bit of yellow. This side hasn't had too much. You can also go right on the edge. There we go. That looks pretty good. So now I'm going to turn my heat back on, and now normally it just needs a few minutes to set. I'm going to give this, because it's red, I'm going to give it an extra few minutes. So instead of 5 minutes, for example, it might need 10, because we want to make sure that red is really set before we turn it and then repeat what we've just done. So that's now bubbling away nicely. I'm going to turn it down so that it's just ticking over, and then the other thing I'm going to do, because this is the red and I want to make sure it's fully set. Don't normally do this, but sometimes it's really good to contain the heat within the pot. So if you've got a lid, you can use a lid. I don't have lids for these. So I've just got a piece of foil, just lay it over the top, and that will keep the heat within the pot. And that'll really help with the setting, because that steam will all sort of stay on that surface area. So if you can hear it like boiling, just turn the heat off. It'll maintain enough heat in there just to set it. So I'm going to leave that for sort of 5-10 minutes. We'll come back and we'll check to make sure it's set. Okay, so this has had a good 10 minutes now. I've had the heat on low actually. I've just turned the heat back off because it was starting to boil, so I've just turned it back off. The way to check that we've got a set is just go into an area and just lift some water up. Can you see how that looks largely clear? So now we're going to turn it and we're going to repeat that process. So just lift up your skeins, and as you lift up, you can see if you look into the water, it is pretty much clear. You know, I can't really see any pink in there at the moment. So lift up your skein, and as you do, what you will find is if we look on this side, we've got loads of that lovely red and bright yellow. Turn it over, not so much. So what I like to do is just grab each skein and then just move it a good, you know, almost halfway if you like. Also, what I'm going to do is make sure that I turn it like this, because I want to make sure that I get some dye on both sides of the yarn. So now we can drop that back in. It looks really nice, doesn't it? Drop it back in and then rearrange it as we did before. And I've got a thicker glove on now because the water is really quite hot. So we want to make sure we get some nice light areas. Can you see? This is way lighter than what we had before, and likewise on the other side. So we just want to make sure that we're pulling all of those undyed bits to the top, and you can see I feel like this skein needs more than this skein, but that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to put my heat back on, just low, and we're going to repeat what we did before. Probably not as much dye this time, because if we look at the overall colour in there, we have got quite a lot of red, quite a lot of nice yellow going on. So I'm not going to use as much as I did before, and that also then will add lots of variegation to the colour. I'm going to start with the fire red and try and find some areas that don't really have very much dye. But like I said, I'm not going to use as much. Over here, definitely. Over here. A little bit more. A bit there. Maybe a tiny bit there. Just a little bit more dye. Ooh, that's a lot. That looks good. In with the scarlet. Same as before, just find those areas that we've already gone on. And just a little bit on top, a little bit around. But like I said, I'm just not doing as much this time. Okay, just a tiny bit more there. Right. And then finally the sun yellow. And I'm just going to try and find some spots that don't look like they've had sort of yellow in that area. Final bit here, I think. That looks good. There we go. So now that's our colour finished. It's sort of just bubbling away nicely there. It's not on a rolling boil, it's just that simmering point. So again, I'm going to pop on my little foil lid. Give it just 5 minutes like that with the heat on, and then I can turn the heat off, set it aside to cool. Okay, so on to our sort of tonal, slightly variegated yarn. So in my pot heating up here, I've got a couple of inches in here this time of water and another scoop of the citric acid, so about a tablespoon. And that's heating up nicely, it's just starting to steam, so I'm going to get my yarn into the pot now. So we're just going to drop it in as we did before, but this time we're going to use a different technique that actually we haven't used yet for my favourite blanket, so that's going to be fun. And we don't need to be so sort of cautious or careful with this technique. It's a much more sort of free and easy technique. And whilst that's continuing just to heat up, we're going to make up our first colour. And what we're going to do this time is we're actually going to make a liquid colour. So I'm going to start in with the sugar cane, and we're going to use 1/8 of a teaspoon, a flat 1/8. There we go, into your little pot, your little jug. And now I'm going to fill that with warm tap water up to about 200 mils. And then just give it a stir with your spoon. And the reason the water's warm is the dye powder just dissolves much easier if the water's warm. And you can see we've not got a huge amount of colour going on there, because like I said, this is a gentle colour, the background colour. It's really pretty, but really quite gentle. And now we're going to go over to our pot, which is nice and steamy now. And I'm going to turn the heat down a bit. But what will happen is when we introduce more water, it'll lower the temperature. So you can keep the heat on whilst we're dyeing this one. So I'm going to take my little pot and I'm literally going to pour it all over the surface. You don't need to worry too much, just pour it over. So I'll start over here and just go all the way over like that. And then all the way back. There we go. And then take your big spoon and just give it a little tap around, just to make sure we've got all of that dye colour in contact with the yarn. And you can see it's a really subtle colour that's going on there, but this is just what we want for this background colour this time. And now we're going to use the lichen. So same thing, I'm going to use about a teaspoon into the pot, and then again to about 200 mils with warm water. So you can probably tell this one is much more of a murky colour. The sugar cane is a really lovely golden yellow. This one is definitely, it's like a sort of slightly greenish, yellowish murkiness that it currently looks. It's actually a much prettier colour than it looks in the jug. So a good stir to make sure that everything's dissolved. And then we're just going to move our yarn before we pour this in. So just grab your yarn and pull it out. And at the moment you can see it's a really subtle colour that's going on there. So I'm just going to move it a little bit. I'm not really going to mess with the skeins other than that, because it's a liquid pour. I find that the dye gets into the yarn much easier than when it's sort of speckling. So we've got some areas that don't have any colour on at all, and then we've got some of that golden yellow peeking through. And then same thing with our lichen, with our sort of muddy pond water colour. If you like that sort of a colour, you'll love this one. And just pour it over. You can see that's a slightly darker shade than that yellow we just used. Perfect. Give it a little push down. So we're building layers, even though this is a very subtle colour, we're building those layers. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pep it up. We're really going to sort of, because at the moment when you look in that pot it does look a little bit murky, doesn't it? What we're going to do now is lift it, and we're going to create that sort of bright limey green that when you look at a quince fruit, it is a very subtle colour, especially in the sort of early stages of the fruit, but it's very definitely a greenish yellowish sort of slightly, you know, bright limey but pale. It's hard to describe. So the chartreuse is what's going to now lift it, but you need to be careful with the chartreuse because it's deadly stuff. So I'm really only going to use the kind of tip of the spoon.
Can you see I've not really got very much at all? And we'll just see what that looks like. I know it doesn't look like very much there in the jug, but wait till we add a bit of water. Can you see where the water's caught it there in the bottom? So same thing again to about 200ml. It is, you know, a very intense green. So we've produced that colour just from that tiny bit. So I'm going to go with that and put that in because we can always add a bit more. So we're just going to move that skein once more. So you can see now we've got, it's a really lovely colour actually. This bit here is the lichen and it's a bit more greenish. And then where you can see the sort of golden colour, that's just the sugar cane. So just grab it and move it a little bit and then back in. And if there's any sort of residual dye left in the water, just this action of moving it around and rearranging it, it'll absorb that extra bit. Okay, I'm just going to crank up my heat a little bit just to make sure we maintain a good temperature, because adding in all this water cools it down. And then we're going to pour in. It looks a bit like nuclear fuel, doesn't it? Not that I know what nuclear fuel looks like. But we're just going to pour this in now. Now it might be that I decide to just put half of this on this layer and I might turn it. But let's just see what happens. Yeah, you see I've got a little bit left there. And I think what I'm going to do is move it and just put a bit more on the other side. So I'm just going to leave that for like literally 1 minute. Get my big spoon in just to help it along. Let the heat come back up. It is now nice and steamy again. So I'm just going to move it because I just want to make sure that I get some of that brightness through the whole of the skein. So just drop that back in and then we'll pour in that extra bit we've got left. Lovely. So just back in with the remainder of the chartreuse. There we go. So it's subtle, but just adding that bit of green will really lift it up. So now I'm just going to bring the temperature up. Let that come so it starts to simmer. We can then turn it off and pop it outside with the other skeins. Okay, so that's both of our yarns dyed. They're outside, cooling down, very excited to finish off these and get them knitted into the blanket. So I will see you back in part 2 when we are going to wind the yarn and we're going to get to the knitting. So see you back soon.
What a gorgeous start to the show. Oh my goodness, 2 amazing colours. And I particularly loved your homemade lids.
My homemade lids. Oh.
For your pans.
Now, those pans did come with lids, but I just never used them. So I just put them in the recycling because they were glass. But whenever I need to put a lid on, I just put a bit of foil on top. Works fine, yeah.
What an amazing... Is it a Japanese quince?
It's a shrub.
Right.
Yeah, a deciduous shrub.
Right.
And it originates obviously in Japan.
Yeah.
Hence the name, but it's grown quite commonly here these days.
My mum's got quinces in her garden.
Right.
I wonder what type they are.
I wonder.
It'd be interesting to know.
Yeah.
I shall ask her.
Yeah. But beautiful, beautiful plant, and you've got those really pretty fruits to come later in the season.
I love the green of the quince.
Yeah,
just perfect.
Yeah, when you look up some pictures of quince fruit, it is very yellow, but there are some that have got that slight green tinge to them as well. Yeah.
But that is, of course, just the start of the show. In part 2, Kay will be answering some of your questions.
Yeah.
And also, most importantly, showing you how to knit the final increase section of My Favourite Blanket.
Yes.
But that's to come later on, because right now it's time for a rather special Kay Jones What's Off Your Needles.
I do have one thing, And
But it's vast.
it's absolutely ginormous. It's the ginormous cowl that I was knitting, do you remember, a couple of episodes ago? And I finished it, and it is massive, I've got to say.
Wow.
Look at how squishy it is. So this was the cowl that I knitted in the super chunky yarn. So it's Stylecraft Special XL Tweed. And I used almost 4 balls of this. They come in 100 gram balls and you get 74 yards. And the colourway is, it's sort of rubbed off.
Oh, no.
It's just called grey. 109 something, I think, but it's rubbed off, unfortunately. It's just grey. And I used almost 4 balls. I had this much left. I know that looks like a lot. It's quite, if that was fingering weight, that'd be like 60 grams or something, wouldn't it? But there's very little left. I don't know how much that weighed. But I finished a pattern repeat and it was plenty wide enough, so I just ended it at that point. And I put in my crunkled pattern from my crunkled socks, which was fun. I mean, it's gigantic. And it is a good size. I'll put it on. It's huge, but I think this is going to someone she's just turned 21 and... You know, I think she will love the kind of massive, look how lovely it is. Oh, it's so nice and warm. It's swooshy.
Perfect.
I think she will love it. So you can loop it twice. And now I've got to get it off without ruining it because I did block it. So I just want to keep it nice because I need to wrap it up because we'll be seeing her soon. So yeah, it's for a family member who's just turned 21. And I think she will love it. So I cast on, I said I would tell you the cast on number if the size worked out okay, and it has, as you can see. So I cast on 120 stitches and I used, it does recommend 10mm. I can't remember now. You'll remember from last time I did tell you what size. I think it was 10mm or it might have been 8. I'm not sure. If you look back on the episode before, then I'll tell you. But yeah. 120 stitches, crunkled pattern, and I just knit until I'd used up almost 400 grams. And I got this gorgeous, massive, squishy cowl. I think she'll really love it. So I'm going to wrap that up now, ready to give to her. And I can't say I would rush to knit another one of these, only because it was just so hard work with the needle size because it was so massive. And someone did say to me, and I am aware that you can do this, that you can actually have a smaller needle on your left-hand needle because it's your right-hand needle where the stitches, where you're knitting onto, that dictates the size of your stitches. So you can have a smaller needle on the other side, and that might have made the knitting a bit easier. I didn't do that because I just thought, well, yeah, it might make the knitting a bit easier, but I'd have to go and get another needle and change it. And I was just like, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to carry on. And it didn't actually take me that long in terms of knitting because it's just so enormous. But I just kept thinking about how much she'll really like it, and that sort of kept me going. And yeah, my hands were fine and everything. I didn't sit and do it for like an hour. I would just do 20 minutes at a time, and that was just perfect. So that's all ready to give as a gift.
It's a perfect example, I think, of sometimes it's not about the knitting experience, it's about the end product.
No.
And
I knew I wouldn't really enjoy it that much.
But I sometimes it's worth it when you know that.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think, as you mentioned when you showed it 2 episodes ago, that you'd knitted a one before.
Yes.
And that was years ago.
And that was years ago.
She still wears it now.
She does still wear that now, yeah.
So actually, she's going to love it.
Yeah, she will love it.
And that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
That's what it's about. Yeah, sometimes you just do that, don't you? Because you want the end product and you know that the person will appreciate it. And in terms of time that it took me to knit it, probably, I can't say
Minimal.
how long. Yeah, I mean, it might have been 4 or 5 hours worth of knitting, something like that.
Yeah.
So really not that bad.
No.
And worth it. And the yarn's lovely, gorgeous and soft.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Speaking of gorgeous yarn, I think it's time that we got back for the second part of My Favourite Blanket, where we'll be skeins it up And then we'll be knitting it in. Oh, yes. Here it is, part 2 of my favourite blanket.
Welcome back everybody to part 2 of my favourite blanket, and it's the beautiful Japanese Quince coloured yarn that we've been doing today. So after it had cooled down outside, and I'll just say actually, if you're wondering why I put foil over the top of the tonal yarn, the only reason is because it started to snow outside, so I was just covering it over. I wouldn't normally have done that. But yeah, after it had cooled down, brought it in, I gave it a lovely rinse in some gentle wool wash. I'm still using the Eucalan lavender. To be fair, I've used that for years and it is one of my favourites. So I gave it a lovely rinse and just let it sort of hang out in the water for a little while. The tonal yarn didn't bleed at all, as you would expect. The speckled yarn, there was a little bit of pink in the water. I always kind of expect that when I use red, because inevitably you do have tiny little dye particles that just don't fully absorb into the yarn, and then they just float off into the water, and it can give a slight pink hue to the water. But when I was squidging it out, the water that was running off the yarn was completely clear, so that was brilliant. I then set it to dry, and I've got the yarn here now all ready to cake up to start knitting our blanket. But as we've sort of created now a little tradition of doing a couple of like a Q&A little session before we actually do that, and there has been a couple of questions that have cropped up in the meantime since the last episode. Now the first one, and I have had this question a number of times over the sort of the past weeks, so I thought it would be good just to sort of address it here. And that is, I've had people ask me if I can actually provide a full list of the dye colours that I'll be using through the series, or, you know, the dye colours that are coming up over the next sort of 2-3 months. But unfortunately, the way that this whole series is developed is a very organic development. And by that, what I mean is that although I did originally plan out all of the plants that I was going to dye colours for the whole series, what I've found is once I've actually dyed up the yarn and I've knit it into the blanket, and I've seen colour placements of one next to another, it's then influenced me on what colours would look the best following those colours that are already in the blanket. And that's made me change my mind on the plants that I've chosen. So inevitably that means that dye colours would be different. But even if I stuck to the exact plants that I originally planned, I don't know right at the beginning what dye colours I'm going to specifically use for each of those plants, because what I do is each month I look at that particular plant, I do all the research, I look into the colours, I go to my dyes, and then I choose colours, and then I do a trial dye run of the yarn. At that point, I then might tweak the colours, and I might use a different colour when we actually come to dye it. So for me to actually provide a full list of all of the dye colours, what that would mean is that effectively I would have to do the whole series in the background before I even filmed anything here with you, because I'd have to dye all of the yarn colours, I'd have to trial them all, I'd have to knit them in, I'd have to make sure I was happy with it all. And although I have got a prototype of this blanket, I do have another sample blanket on the go. I've used that as a means for the pattern development, not necessarily for the colours. So I hope you can appreciate the amount of sort of pre-planning that's been going on for this series, and why I can't unfortunately give you a full list of all of the dye colours. So that's a little bit just about the dyes and the process that goes into the development of all of the colours. And then the other question that I've had recently is a lady asked me how she could avoid the two yarns tangling together as she was knitting. Now, I've never had that problem, and I've knit
various things with yarn held double. I've done blankets, I've done cows, I've done socks, I've done hats, all kinds of things, and I've never had a problem with yarn sort of tangling as such. And you know, they do kind of sit fairly independently, the two yarns, and then I'm just knitting with them as if it's one yarn. So I've never actually had a problem with that, but I'm mentioning it just in case anyone else has. If it's something that you've come across and you've found a solution, then you can comment on the video. So that's the couple of questions that I've had this time. And now it's time to have a little look at the dry yarn and to get it caked up. I'm so excited, it looks so pretty. Okay, so I've got our beautiful yarn here. I'm going to do the speckled one first. And I've got my Swift, I've got my ball winder. So I'm just going to pop this over the Swift, making sure that it's all sort of in the same direction so you've not twisted the skein. And then I always have to jiggle this Swift a bit because it's temperamental. There we go. And now we're just going to take off the ties. Oh, I got the right one, yes. There we go. So let's find the end. And you need to find the end that's coming away from the outside of the skein rather than the inside. Sometimes they do get a little bit twisted. Right, yeah. So I'm just going to thread it through the eye of the ball winder into that slot on the top. So I'm just going to wind. There we go, and then it's away. That wound really nicely. So then I always just pull out the yarn that's sort of jammed in the slot and hold on to it so that I can then tuck it into the centre. Perfect. That's produced the most perfect little cake. Oh, it just looks gorgeous. Oh, so pretty and speckly. It's going to be so lovely to knit this with all those bright specks of red and yellow. So I'm going to get the other one wound up and then we can get to our blanket. Right, so we have got our beautiful yarns caked up and ready to knit into the next section. And I've got the blanket laid out here. Oh, and it just looks so lovely. I have already done a little test knit of these colours, so I do know how it's going to knit up, and it's just going to look so pretty next to this blue and purple and green that came before. Oh, I can't wait. Now, this is the last increase section. So we're on section 4 now, so it's the final increase section. So we are just going to be carrying on as we have been through the last 3 sections. So it's just going to be that one row repeat. We're going to knit to the last stitch and then knit front back in the last stitch and just repeat that row until you have 242 stitches. So your largest stitch count for the blanket is 242 stitches. So that's the number that you need at the end of section 4. Now it's really important that you have that stitch count, because moving forward to the centre section of the blanket, it does need to have that stitch count because we've got some fun going on in the centre section. But that's for next time. Very excited about that. But for now, we are going to carry on with our just gorgeous, squishy, oh, just lovely knitting. Just that increase at the end. Life's happy. So I have cut my yarn here from my previous colour and left, as we've been doing before, left a good tail there. It's probably a bit too much there, but I don't know, what's that? 12 inches maybe, because we just need to knit the first 4 stitches with the old yarn. Now I know that if you look here along the edge, here for example, I'll show you where we changed colours.
you do get a tiny little blip of like the old colour on that same row as the new colour, but honestly I don't think anybody is going to notice that. And what it allows you to have is that really neat, beautiful edge, and then it makes the weaving in, as I've shown you before, it makes the weaving in on the back much simpler than having to negotiate ends that are coming right off the edge. So I don't have a problem with having just those few stitches in that in the old yarn running into the new yarn. No problem at all. You can see you don't even notice it really at all from colour 1 to 2 in mine. So I thought that was just interesting to show you. Okay, so I'm on my longest cable now as well. I changed that over last time. So I'm now on my 40-inch cable, and this is the largest size that I use. So I'm going to start off as we've started off previously, by just knitting the first 4 stitches with the old colour. Oh, it feels so nice to be getting back to knitting on this. There we go. And now we can bring in the new yarns. How very exciting. So I'll just pull off. Something else I'll mention actually as I'm knitting is the way that I keep track of my stitch count. So I don't know how you were all doing that, just keeping track of what stitch count you're on, but there is actually a really easy way. Let me just join this yarn in and then I will tell you what I do. So just leave a tail for weaving in, grab both ends, loop them over and just carry on knitting. Make sure when you knit the second stitch you've got your working yarn and not your tail. And then we just carry on knitting. Oh, and already I'm loving these colours. Oh, so fun. So yeah, what I do, and you all might have realised that you can check your stitch count this way, is I count garter ridges. So you know how many stitches you've got to increase by from one section to the other. And we know that each garter ridge is an increase of 2 stitches, because for each garter ridge you knit 2 rows and on each row you increase 1 stitch. So we know that each garter ridge will give you an increase of 2 stitches. So knowing that, and knowing how many stitches you've got to get to. So for example, if you needed to increase 40 stitches from one section to another, you know that you're going to need 20 garter ridges to do that. So you can just very easily count your garter ridges. So that's what I do, but then I do also 2 or 3 times through the section, I do also just have an actual check and just count them, the stitches, just to make sure I've not missed an increase. And that's worked for me perfectly. I've not had any problems at all. So I'm now just going to knit to the end of this row and then work that knit from back increase. So I'm coming to the end of my row here, and as I've been knitting this row I've just been pondering on the twisting yarns question, and the only thing that I can think is that maybe it's how the yarn is being held, because as you can see here, my yarns, as I'm pulling them off here, there's absolutely no twisting. There's a bit of fluff there, look, let's get that. There's no twisting at all. They lay perfectly happily next to each other. However, if you were holding your yarns, for example, if you held them in the way that maybe you do colour work, but then you're just knitting them sort of together the whole way, then it could be that each of the strands will be knitted at a slightly different tension, and it will mean that you're not pulling them off at an even pace. It's just something that came to my head as I was knitting. Just to clarify, in its sort of simplest form, when you are holding your yarn and you're knitting it double like this through the whole blanket, you are just literally holding both strands as if it's one strand.
So in my case, I grab the yarn, I wrap it around my hand to tension it, and then I just knit, and I'm just imagining it's one strand of yarn. So I'm not holding the two strands away from each other, if you like. So that's just something that occurred to me as I was knitting across. So I'm almost to the end now, and we're just going to do that knit front back increase to complete the first row. And when I do the knit front back, what I actually do is I sort of hold on to the fabric underneath where I'm going to do the increase. I'm holding the fabric here, and then I'm also sort of tensioning the stitch. So can you see I'm holding the fabric with these two fingers? And now I'm going to work the increase, knit front back, and then let go. And that little action might, you know, be making the difference to if your edge is maybe not quite as neat as mine. So you can now, and I can, woohoo! Ooh, so excited. I can now get on and finish this final increase section. So we are just doing that one row repeat. We are knitting to the last stitch and knit front back in the last stitch until you have 242 stitches. So there we go. You now know everything you need to know to finish off section 4 and to get to the width that your blanket will be. So when you finish the end of section 4, you can then have a look at your blanket and you'll know what the width is. So exciting. And just looking down at this first row of knitting that I've done, the way that the colour sits next to the previous colour, it just looks so nice. Oh, I'm so excited too. Can you tell how excited I am? Because I tend to, because I want to make sure that everything is, you know, as it should be, I tend to knit through my sections really quickly because I'm just so keen to see what the finished section looks like so that I can then show you on the show. And that means then that I have a good spell where I'm not working on it, and I'm sure that a lot of you are the same. But what that means is, although you're like, oh, I've reached the end of that section and I'm kind of sad, it just means whenever I come to pick it up again, I'm just so thrilled to be picking it up and so excited to be carrying on working on it. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed dyeing up your Japanese quince yarn, if you're dyeing it yourself, or if you're just going to go into your stash to try and find similar colours, or if you're choosing your own colours. I hope you really enjoy that whole process, and I hope you really enjoy knitting the final increase section. So I am now going to carry on and start knitting to my heart's content, and I will see you back next time for the very, very exciting start of the centre section, so get ready for some extra fun there. So thank you everybody, and I will see you back soon.
What a show, and what a gorgeous colourway, and here it is, knitted up into the blanket itself.
Yes. So
it's just gorgeous.
I have completed section 4, and it's just lovely. Oh, so you can see that gorgeous Japanese quince. Isn't it look so pretty? It just knit up beautifully, and it looks so nice next to the blue, following on from that sort of pinky peach. And then we started off down here. So this that you can see at the bottom here, this is the bottom edge now. And then when we start section 5, we'll be working up the sides. So my blanket measures 40 inches wide, which is just over a metre. I think it's like 102 centimetres. And I think that's just a brilliant width. You could, it more than covers one person. You know, if you were snuggling, you could get 2 people under it, I reckon. And because it's garter stitch as well, inevitably it will probably stretch a little bit. But at the moment, unwashed, unblocked, it's 40 inches is what mine measures. So that will just give you an idea comparatively. You can measure yours at the end of section 4, and then, hopefully you'll be there or thereabouts in terms of your own gauge. So section 4 used a little bit more yarn than the previous ones. With the other sections, I've had about 10-ish grams left of each colour. At the end of section 4, I had 7 grams of each colour left. But still plenty of a buffer in terms of differences in gauge. So 7 grams of each left, which is more than enough for me to knit a square into my mitered square project. So they will be going into that now. Very excited to do that. And such pretty colours. I think that's the thing with this blanket. I really wanted the finished blanket just to be so really lovely and pretty. And for the colours, I didn't want sort of dark colours or moody colours or that kind of thing. I wanted something light and bright and fresh. And just overall, when you look at it, all of the colours are just so pretty and lovely. And this last one I just absolutely love. Bryony's favourite still so far is the blue. That's Bryony's favourite. I don't think I've actually got a favourite. Every time I dye one up, that becomes my latest favourite. Section 4 of mine, all complete. You can get on and knit yours.
So Kay has, of course, shown you how to do everything you need to do in the episode that you just watched for this section of My Favourite Blanket. But if you like a written pattern, there is one available, and it's available free to all Bakery Bear patrons. So that means for $2 a month, you can get access to every section of the pattern as it gets released all the way through the year. Yeah. And you will also be keeping us on air, keeping us right here, making programmes like My Favourite Blanket. Now, you also not just get access to the pattern, you also get to watch for $2 a month our patron-only show, and you can also read the latest issue of our magazine, Knitability.
Yes.
Not bad value much less than the cost of one coffee a month. Oh my goodness. I don't think how much a coffee costs now.
I've no idea.
It was £3.50.
I've no idea how much a coffee is or a tea.
It was £3.50 for a coffee in Starbucks when Starbucks was open, and that was like 5 years ago.
That was years ago. How much is a coffee or a tea these days in like Costa or Starbucks? I've no idea because we just don't go in anymore, because I don't drink coffee. I love it, I just can't drink it with my tummy anymore.
I do,
and you
but I'm a coffee snob.
But Dan's a coffee snob, so he will only drink his own coffee.
Because whenever you go into a Starbucks, sometimes you will find someone who knows what they're doing.
It depends on the barista.
You need to know. It does.
Yeah.
I want everyone to know, and Kay will vouch for me here, the rare time I ended up in a coffee shop and I had a decent coffee, what did I do?
You went and told them. You went back and told them.
I found the specific barista and I told them how good their coffee was.
Was it a lady? I forget.
So you're implying I only ever did it once?
No. There was a lady in Starbucks.
In Northallerton? No.
No, the one that we used to have in town.
That shut. Yes.
There was a lady barista and she was really good. You always said that she made really good coffee.
Yeah, but the rest were rubbish.
The rest weren't, So I think it really does depend on the barista.
You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other...
It might be like... Do you think it's still £3.50 for a...
I don't know.
Like a cappuccino? Tell us what the price of a cappuccino is where you are. I'm interested.
My favourite will be back on the 14th of April, because next time the Rise and Fall of the Monasteries returns. And do you remember in episode 2 that we spoke about the contretemps? Do you like that? That's a good word. It's like an argument, like a clash of two.
Yes.
So do you remember when we visited Revo, we spoke about the problem with the monastery over the hill and the bells ringing and it waking up the monks, and it could not be endured. We are, of course, going to visit that monastery in the next episode. So yes, we'll be discovering what is an absolutely fascinating, it couldn't be more different to Revo, the fascinating story of the monks of Byland Abbey in the next The Rise and Fall of the Monasteries, which will be the next time we see you in 2 weeks. Right now, though, it's time for the Endy Bits.
Endy Bits!
Oh, my goodness. Now, if you have been enjoying The Rise and Fall of the Monasteries and you would like to know books that I would recommend on the subject, many of which I'm using for research for the show, you definitely want to go and watch our latest patron-only show, which we broadcast last Sunday. We spoke about fashion, because I'm a fashion girl.
We did.
That was a rather interesting
brilliant.
Conversation. So we spoke about fashion. We looked at some current fashions, and then we looked at fashions from the years past. But also, you previewed the Summer of Stitching too.
I did.
Spoke a bit more about the Summer of Stitching.
Yeah.
But then I spoke about 4 books I would recommend on the subject of medieval monasteries and life in medieval times. So whether you are someone who just wants to dip your toe in the water and just read something fun about medieval England, I recommended something for that. But then also, if you are a bit more serious and you want to really get your teeth into something, I recommended a few books which would be totally appropriate for you too.
I spoke about a book I was reading, didn't I?
You did.
I was reading my first ever Agatha Christie. I've never read an Agatha Christie, which is shameful, and I got one for Christmas, and I actually just finished it, and it was brilliant.
That's cool.
I read And Then There Were None, and it was fantastic.
Cool. And so you can hear about all of that in our latest patron-only show, which is linked in our show notes below. And I didn't actually say, for those of you who want to get access to the written pattern for My Favourite Blanket, that's also linked in our show notes below. Last week's radio show was all about humour, and people seem to have absolutely loved it,
really?
which is really cool.
Right.
We spoke about how I developed my very strange sense of humour. We spoke about what Kay's sense of humour is, what you find funny, what you don't find funny. We also spoke about...
And we're very different in that, aren't we, I think? Yeah.
We also spoke about, is it possible, because you hear lots of comedians saying it's not possible to be funny in the modern world. We also spoke about that as well, with quite surprising results.
Yeah, it was interesting, really interesting conversation.
Yes. Do you have anything for Endy Bits this time?
Do you know, I don't, because I'm not really buying anything at the moment.
Fine by me.
I don't.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of another wonderful video show. It's been wonderful to see you.
It has.
We shall be back in 2 weeks.
We will.
With, as I said earlier,
Get knitting your blankets, everyone.
With the next exciting episode of The Rise and Fall of the Monasteries. So thanks so much for watching.
Thank you, everybody.
And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Sitting and knitting, it's Dan and Kay, the bakery prayers. Enthusiasm's not quitting for Dan and Kay, the bakery prayers. They'll take you to fabulous places of which their favorites they'll share. You better buy a pattern and get yourself a bakery bear. You'll find yourself in a castle while watching the bakery bears. It never feels like a hassle to sit and watch the bakery bears. What's on your shelf or what's in your oven, or maybe a shawl you'll want to wear. So sit yourself right down and watch Dan and Kay, the bakery